cinemologists. No other cinematic adventure is as much a heaping dose of joy and excitement as Terry Gilliam's The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. It's long been my favorite film of all time, and it's also a fulfillment of wishes to see brought to life those Baroque fantasies of the 18th century. It's also incredibly underexposed and underrated. Why? Well, that's why I'm here. The Adventures of Karl Friedrich Hieronymus Baron von Munchausen were first collected by Raspe in the 18th century, later indelibly illustrated by Gustave Doré. Since then, the Baron was pervasively well known. For the longest time, it was even the second most published book, next to the Bible, of course. There have been several screen versions of the Baron, one by the marvelous Czech filmmaker Karel Zeman. But once Terry Gilliam made his version in 1989, the legend of Baron Munchausen seemed to die off after that. What happened? It seems Gilliam is like a lightning rod when it comes to making films. The higher he reaches, the more likely he is of getting fried. And yet, miraculously, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen was made, as it could have very well been another greatest film never made. It sure sounds like it when you consider that at $45 million, Baron was the most expensive European production at the time. Filmed at the celebrated Cinecittà Studios in Rome, the film was beset by production difficulties and hiatuses while shooting on location in Spain. Then a completion bond company was closed to suing Gilliam unless cuts were made to the script, and even then the budget still increased. I'd say poor Terry, but through adversities like this, he has produced some of the most fantastic art of the 20th century, and I'm sure he knows it. In some ways, it's all very fitting for a movie about Baron Munchausen who leaps from one unbelievable scenario to the next.
What will become of the Baron?
Surely this time he'll not escape. What will become of the Baron? Surely this time he will not escape. Boom.
Much of the production difficulties and budget confusion are covered well in the Misadventures of Munchausen documentary on the Blu-ray and DVD. I'm here to tell you about why this film was a marvel and what's great about it. I mean, what am I supposed to do on the internet? Constantly rip things apart? To summarize, the film is about a besieged town, and in this town, the theater is putting on a play about the adventures of Baron Munchausen. Things go fine until the real Baron Munchausen shows up and ridicules their presentation. Then he shows them how it really went down, and why he is the reason their town is in ruins, and that he must go and bring back his extraordinary servants. What follows is one incredible adventure after another, leading to a bizarre and somewhat metafictional conclusion. I first saw this movie on a lazy afternoon by myself, and I don't think any other environment would have allowed me to become as bewitched by the film as that intimate setting. Growing up, I've always had a fondness for 18th century art, be it music, painting, sculpture, architecture, or even ideas proffered by its great works of literature. This movie is a sort of celebration of all that. As Gilliam puts it, it's 18th century science fiction, the only way it could have been done then, with flights to the moon and riding on cannonballs.
I didn't precisely fly. I merely held on to a mortar shell in the first instance, then a cannonball on the way back.
But it's also about imagination, and is the third in Gilliam's semi-official Imagination trilogy. This begins with Time Bandits, the story of a boy, continues with Brazil, the story of a man, and ends with Baron Munchausen, an old man. In an interview in Cinefantastique magazine, Terry Gilliam says, "The cycle is starting again here, because it's an 8-year-old girl who regenerates the Baron's passion for living. What revives the Baron is that Sally's a good listener, and if you're a liar, you need an attentive audience." This is really the crux of the movie. The character of Sally is in the process of figuring out the world around her, calling things into question. The Baron, through his tales, brings wonder into her life, and she, in turn, rejuvenates the Baron by hearing his stories. But I would go a step further and suggest that Sally is also representative of us, the audience, and how we view such fantastic things in movies. The Baron, being old, comes into a ruined theater where his stories are being treated with irony and a not inconspicuous wink to the audience. As the Baron says,
"You present me as if I were a ridiculous fiction, a joke. I won't have it."
Adventure that today, this is how anything approaching this sort of fantasy is treated, not with complete sincerity, but with a spoiling dose of cynicism and nitpicking. If the Baron wants to go to the moon, he'll do it, and he'll make you believe it.
Where are we going?
To the moon.
What? That'll take ages.
No, it won't.
He'll lift himself out of the water by his hair, astride his faithful steed Bucephalus, and by golly, you'll consider it possible.
Well, come on! I can't keep this up forever!
You do believe me, don't you?
I'm doing my best.
To really enjoy this movie, you have to put yourself in the proper frame of mind, so that you will be able to allow yourself to be whisked off and get the most out of it. There are several Gilliam regulars in the cast here, such as Charles McEwan, who also co-wrote the screenplay, as Adolphus, with eyesight to see halfway around the world. Winston Dennis, who was under masks in his last two Gilliam films, here plays the gentle strongman Albrecht. Jack Purvis of Time Bandits plays Gustavus of the Hurricane Force Breaths. Rounding out the Baron's extraordinary servants is Eric Idle as Berthold, the fastest runner in the world.
Well, I've never worked for him before and I won't be back.
Returning from Brazil is Jonathan Pryce as the Right Ordinary Horatio Jackson, a slimy bureaucratic stickler, an odd irony considering his last role. In the crater of Mount Etna live the gods Venus and Vulcan, played respectively by a very young Uma Thurman and a very scruffy Oliver Reed.
So I pick him up bodily and I throw him into this whirlpool and he's sucked through the middle of the world and he comes out the other side and fights the Turks. Does that make sense? Does to me.
A surprise guest star of the film was wonderful Robin Williams, playing the King of the Moon.
Cogito ergo es. I think, therefore you is.
I despise you, let me go! No! No!
I'm back! I got lips again, and I'm gonna use them, baby!
This whole sequence is giddy madness, and even finds a part for Italian movie diva Valentina Cortese to play the unfortunate wife of the Moon King. Here it is worth noting that there are all different kinds of women in the film, whom the Baron mostly takes a shine to. Alison Steadman plays a woman who is at the turning point of femininity, in motherhood, trying to maintain her youth. Charles McEwan notes that the Queen of the Moon represents a second blossoming of womanhood, and that death is even presented as a woman. Beautiful ladies indeed. Oh, and Sting has a cameo in the film as well, but I could go on. Sarah Polley plays Sally with self-assurance and wit, a role which would have made or broken the film. At key moments, she is the foil to the Baron's quixotic fancies and escapades.
You're giving up, aren't you? Well, you can't give up. I won't let you.
Oh, wait, clear off.
Finally, the Baron himself is played by John Neville, whom Gilliam cast because he wanted an actor who had fallen out of memory, like Munchausen. I could not imagine another actor embodying the Baron with the same confidence, adventurous spirit, and hint of snookery as John Neville has. And of course, the music in this film is exuberant. Michael Kamen, working with Gilliam a second time, provides a very period-specific score, both in orchestration and in sound. The cues are played with a smaller orchestra in some places, just as in the theater scene, but burst in full when the Baron's exploits are on display. The theme of the Baron hypes someone up to go out and ride a horse off into the sunset. Cues such as those on the moon have the dreamlike twinkling of harpsichords.
Oh, tight! I don't want to escape! Oh, no! Oh, gosh! I can't hold on!
And in the ballroom sequence, the beautiful Baron waltz is sheer delight. Action cues for the final battle are driving and properly victorious. A standout piece is the Mozart-esque Requiem for the Baron after his encounter with death. The music here is quite moving. In fact, that whole sequence leading up to the funeral is grand. The Baron is in the midst of a victory celebration when he is shot down by Horatio Jackson. Immediately, death bursts from its own sculpture to steal the life of the Baron. The great Dante Ferretti was the production designer and gave the film its patina of the Baroque and of neoclassicism. The latter is especially evident in the scenes on the moon, where classicism and mythology mixed with the 18th century as in the dreams of perhaps so many artists who made the look of that era. The set of the enormous ships in the belly of the whale have their echoes today in the third Pirates of the Caribbean film. Full advantage was taken of the actually ruined Spanish town of Belchite to appear as the town besieged by Turks in the film. Such a film at least needs to be a spectacle, and the special effects on display here are illustrious. See for yourself, they are built around many in-camera and optical effects, some quite clever in execution. Here an underwater rod puppet is utilized for the flying death, or marionettes of the Baron and Venus dance among the clouds. It all glimmers of Golden Age effects, each sequence delivering some wild feat of the Baron's. There is even a pinch of CGI in a very fitting application. As I said about Muppet Treasure Island, its classic and timeless look tells of the end of the great analog adventure films. If it weren't for the fact that the studio was afraid to sink even more money to promote what was seeming to be a giant mess, and it isn't, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen may have ended up becoming a beloved classic. Well, even then, Terry Gilliam's movies are an acquired taste, so that isn't even guaranteed. Yet it might have sat alongside such films as Ghostbusters and Labyrinth.
I believe is it 48 prints they made in America? That's what they opened with. I mean, this is crazy. Well, in fact, they only released 117 prints at all. An art film in those days would get 400 prints. I mean, this is madness.
But like the Baron, it returned to life, this time in video stores, where its cult following began. Fortunately, it's not in much danger of falling into obscurity. I know enough people who have seen it, and it always warms the cockles of my heart to introduce it to someone new. Criterion even released it on Laserdisc with quite a few extras.
I am overwhelmed.
I'll tell you about my favorite scene now. It could be the thrilling dance with Venus, or the shenanigans with Robin Williams as the Moon King, but it's actually when the Baron is talking with Sally, lamenting about how people aren't interested in him anymore.
No place for three-legged cyclops in the South Seas. No place for cucumber trees and oceans of wine. No place for me.
The Baron begins to come alive again here, and the lead up to the scene is quite atmospheric and mysterious, culminating with Sally confronting death, as she had been stalked by it earlier. In many cases, it would appear that imagination is one combat against the marching progress of age in our lives.
You look different. Younger.
I always feel rejuvenated by a touch of adventure.
If you need a film to inspire imagination and put a modicum of joy back into your life, I highly recommend you go out and see this film immediately. This is Alex Latanzi of The Cinemologist saying, "Beautiful lady."
Is there a doctor in the fish?